I've more or less made tutorials from the start of the channel, but it took me a long time to realize just how many people actually follow them. In this video I want to talk a bit about what I learned making them and how I intend to improve going forward. I won't go too much in depth, just talking about my thoughts making tutorials in broad terms. I will also share a couple of thoughts on the builds that still need tutorials. Also stick to the end of the video to see what build I've decided to cover next. But first, I really need to thank all the builders that follow my tutorials. From the most dedicated builders that finish most of my tutorials to people that even attempt but never really finish them. You guys are really awesome and I have so much respect for you. Following tutorials was actually one of the things that really elevated my own builds. So I really believe that even though you don't deviate that much from my designs, you still learn so much, just as I did. To all builders, this one's for you. If I were to mention a through line for the learning process I've been through making tutorials, I would probably say, expecting what information you need to recreate my builds reliably. And the problem is that often that knowledge is inaccessible until I get feedback, and then it's usually too late. So here are a couple of things that I've learned. First thing I've learned, I should not expect people to think like I do. This is probably best exemplified in how I convey measurements. As an architect, my default approach is to show measurements like I would in real life. I don't count blocks, I measure walls. And the measurements I post are correct, but there are many ways to count blocks. Are the corners included in both measurements? What about the inner corner blocks? Going forward, I need to be crystal clear so people don't start with a bad, foundation. A single error in the foundation will permeate throughout the build, and that error will often be found after many hours of building. Some of you can attest to that. And I think the sanctum is probably the one that suffers from this the most. So, just to be clear, this issue is solved by thinking in terms of measurements like I do. But people have different approaches, so I need to communicate this information in multiple ways to make it clear to everyone. Second thing I've learned. Some people always want the option to create my builds in their own worlds. And this is something I've underestimated, because even for builds like the Emperor Castle, which is heavily context dependent, people still want that option. I realized that after episode 1, so I added that info in episode 2 and 3, and of course it should have been in the first episode. And yet again, I expected people to think like I do. Why build it in any other context, right? Going forward, this has to be covered in the beginning. Now, there are builds that are heavily tied to the terrain they're built on, but I would say that most builds are flexible enough to work in different contexts. For the first 2 points, I really want to hear your thoughts. I can take these things into account going forward, but I'm not quite sure what to do with the existing tutorials. I have 2 solutions in mind, and I really want to hear your thoughts on both of them. First solution is to re-upload the first episode of each series with the updated information and then mark the original video as outdated or something similar. The second solution is to make a whole new video with all the needed information, call that one part 1 and then rename all the other videos in the series. So the original part 1 is changed to part 2 and part 2 is changed to part 3 and so on. In the second solution, there's no confusion as to the order of the episodes. But yeah, I'm not sure yet. Let me know what you think. I really need your input on this one. Third thing I've learned. The UI is important. My first couple of tutorials were basically just replay mod recordings. No hotbar, no crosshair, no block placing animations, nothing. Because of the way I've recorded the videos up until now and the tools I've used, this has been a bit difficult to retrofit onto the video. But I've solved most of it. The final thing missing is the block type info that shows up each time you switch between blocks. The way I've done it up until now is adding a list of materials on screen before each section, so you roughly know what to use for each part of the video. But the way the game itself conveys that information is much more intuitive, I think. I will still add a complete list of materials in the description, of course. But going forward, the UI will more or less be like when you play normally. There are other things too, like it's always better to have more commentary during the video to give the needed information. But in the end, it's a matter of time and how long it takes to add voiceover for hours and hours of video. Others do that in real time while building, but yeah, I'm just not there yet. There's probably a sweet spot for the right amount of info without it taking too much time. When looking at the array of builds I've yet to cover, you could categorize them from least to most dependent on context, or terrain in case of Minecraft. On one extreme you have something like the Echelon. It could be built anywhere really. On the other extreme you have something like Crestling Castle, which is completely built and designed with the terrain in mind. Most of my builds are somewhere in the middle, where the main building or buildings work as individual structures, but the fortified walls, bridges, and so on are context dependent. In each category, builds can be more or less complex, but everything being equal, the less context dependent a build is, the easier it is to translate into a tutorial. Many of my builds were made without a tutorial in mind, or at least without any regard for a possible tutorial in the future. And yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure if it does or doesn't need to be part of the design process, because, I mean, the argument for it is easy. If I can design a build in a way that makes it easy to tutorialize, so to speak, then why not do it every time? But on the other hand, it just feels too restrictive. If I feel the urge to make something structurally complex where nothing aligns, the fear of a potential tutorial shouldn't scare me, I think. Both approaches have their pros and cons, but yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think. But before you worry too much, I'm not saying I won't ever cover something like Crestline Castle or the Monastery. But when the time comes, I just need to find the best approach, that's all. The time frame of the releases for each tutorial is difficult to predict, unfortunately. With everything that happens in my private and work life, having enough time to do all the videos I want to do is, difficult. In the end, it's very much a zero-sum game. Even if I only focused on tutorials from now on, it will still take me months, if not years, to finish all of them. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy making these tutorials, and seeing the enthusiasm from you guys makes it even more enjoyable. But I also really need to create new builds and new videos to fuel my own creativity. And I have a long list of awesome stuff I really want to make. But the good thing is, I will keep making these tutorials, and luckily the next one is almost done. I knew I wanted to cover something very different from Emberheart Castle, because that one was that was a tough one. But something more straightforward. Several builds came to mind, and I ended up settling on a build that wasn't too big, still big but not too big, and also a build that has been requested for a really long time. The Emerald Cathedral. So stay tuned for that very soon. That's basically what I wanted to talk about. Let me know your thoughts on any aspects of the video. I'm always open to new ideas. I really appreciate you all, and thank you to all that stuck around till the end. And of course, a massive thank you to all my patrons and YouTube members. Watching, commenting, liking, and sharing my videos always helps. And if you want to, you can support me on Patreon or here on YouTube as a member to get access to all my builds. But yeah, I'm grateful either way. So thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Get ready to build the next one. I'm out. Bye guys.